Well done. Thank you for keeping the time very strictly. We will now go on to the talk of Nimrod Hagiladi from Haifa University. Nimrod is has a PhD. He's a lecturer at the Command and Staff College, again, of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. He's a member of the Center for Military Studies in the IDF and the teaching fellow in the International Program of Israel Studies in Haifa University. And he will talk to us about the black market in the mandate and in young Israel.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon. So, when speak about transition, an important issue to discuss is the establishment of Israel state, and 48 as a turning point in the Israeli history. And indeed, Asaf Lichovsky already showed us in some of his articles that in a lot of ways 48 was not such a dramatic turning point or crossroad. In some fields, and in some fields, the legacy and the heritage of old habits was much more important than political change. And today I want to discuss this matter regarding the development of the black market in Israel and its some implications of it. But first, what is a black market? So black market is a worldwide phenomenon which develops in times of stress when rations are mandatory in order to protect the society from an economic catastrophe. It may consider as a free market force attempting to reach a new balance between supply and demand as a result of the governmental restraints. And we have three main periods regarding that issue. So the black market during the Second World War. Until the Second World War, starting in the summer of 1939, the policy of the government and of the Jewish leadership regarding the hoarding of products was an obligation, and it was encouraged. Once the war broke out, and actually right after the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, even before the war actually started, limitations were imposed on free commerce, hoarding was prohibited, and prices were supervised. During the first month of the war, there was a public alarm, which was reflected through the increased prices and a wave of profiteering. During the summer months of 1941, the supply condition has exacerbated. By the end of that year, the situation was defined as crisis, and since the end of 1941 until the summer of 1942, many emergency times measures were held aiming to solve that crisis that lasted to the end of the war. New governmental offices were founded to handle the supply and the supervision of economy. Local markets switched to the method in which certain products were rationed and the prices of others were frozen. Many laws were enacted attempting to stabilize the prices and the commerce, and the war against the black market was aggravated. Special court was established for the judgment of profiteers. The development of supervision regime required a great scope of bureaucratic activity on various levels. That effort shaped a large part of the commerce norms existing at present, starting with the determination of standards for subsidized bread, and up to the demand that each seller should issue a receipt and visibly present the price of the merchandise. But albeit all this, during the Second World War, the black market in Palestine thrived and its scope was most extensive. By the way, we can see here the Russian method that started at the mandatory period based on coupons, and the Israeli form that actually continued the same exactly method. The research of the black market during the Independence War, 48 War, reveals a wide scope phenomenon, which preoccupied the Jewish community during its transition into a sovereign state and was the focus of stormy public debate. The departure of the Brits and the battles in the rural and urban areas were escalated by the dismantling of the regime's order and the thriving of the black market. During a relatively short period, in the first month of the war, and mainly during the months of February, April 48, the scope of the black market intensified gradually. Throughout that period, the attempt to organize the supply and fight the black market was improvised and led by the local municipalities and authorities. The ability of the leaders to control the situation was limited. The role bearers lacked experience in state management, and so there was tension among the various authorities. Various organizations started discussing the subject and the ways to diminish the black market and its defeat, but the actual action was limited. It was almost in Krylov's fable about the crab, the fish, and the pike. Each tried to pull the cart in different direction, and the result is the cart is stuck in the mud. So, as the institution of the state was stabilized in the summer of 48, the supervision modes of commerce in general, and about food commerce in particular, were being organized. Generally, the mandatory rule acted as a model for proper management as it positioned the worthy standards, determined action, and legislation patterns, which continued existing in the state of Israel as well. The limited success of the mandatory rule in its coping with the black market remained the same, while the fight against it acquired a political component. A discussion in the black market turned into an arena of mutual accusation about its formation, as means to acquire the sympathy of the public by going against the profiteers, a phenomenon which will grow and intensify in the following years. In April 49, the Israeli government announced austerity plan, the Tzena. The austerity period continued the policy of economic supervision of the Brits during the mandate rule. During its first year, the program gained quite a lot of success for most of the citizens of the state, including the hundreds of thousands of newcomers who were nourished and no one died of hunger. In the second year, the program cracks were gradually put in its actualization. The black market grew and more public took part in it. The dimension of the phenomenon and the severity of the shortage turned into a political problem. In order to prevent economic collapse, the Ministry of Supply and Rationing declared rationing for shoes and clothing at the end of July 50, which was the last straw. The public lost its trust in the government and its ability to provide its needs, and masses turned to the black market. In fact, the official market almost ceased existing since most of the economic activity turned into the illegal channels. It was a kind of civilian disobedience of the public against the government, escorted by ample political criticism by the opposition parties about the policy of the government. Following this disobedience, the government declared war against the black market on two major fronts. The first was on the practical level, meaning police raids, etc. And the second was comprehensive propaganda operations. Nevertheless, the operation did not last long, and already in its midst, public criticism throughout the opposition parties was turned against the steps of the government, the aggression it used and its mode which led to the totalitarian rule. The extensive public criticism had political outcomes. The Ministry of Supply and Rationing was dismantled. Dov Joseph had to move to another ministry, and Mapai party was beaten in the election for local authorities. The big operation against the black market did not liquidate it. Few weeks after the opening of the operation, the activity in the black market diminished, but gradually the profiteers returned to the routine and the business thrived again. So, examination of the major milestones in the development of the black market and the reaction of the authorities to it indicated that in these crisis points, the public reacted in a similar and even identical manner to the action of the government, despite the changes of rule, the changing conditions, and even changed population. The actions of the public, as well as those of the authorities, were shaped already during the British mandate and in the years of the Second World War. For example, this exposed in the existence of special courts to prevent profiteering. The anti-profiteering tribunals were first founded in 1942 during the Second World War and persisted in different variations through the 50s, despite the rise of the new Israeli state. The special tribunals were a unique phenomenon. They were created as public courts in which the judges were not the professional judges, but rather local public figures under the municipalities, with the task of educating the public and acting as a moral compass for the entire population. These courts were closed towards the end of the Second World War and then re-established during Israel's War of Independence as an improvisation of the Jewish authorities, based on the mandatory experience. These courts were closed only in the late 50s, and over the years, tens of thousands of trials against profiteers were held, a clear expression of the authorities' perception of the threat posed by the black market, requiring a separate judicial system. Now, the Ordinance for the Prevention of Profiteering from August 48 was almost a direct continuation of the mandatory law, including the principle of judgment by the public representatives, the right of appeal, and even punishment and maximum fines. All the emergency laws enacted during the Second World War remained valid also in the laws of the State of Israel, and they instructed the anti-profiteering tribunals. This was not so obvious. 2 years later, after they re-established, Kibbutzim Beit HaShita, Maoz Chaim, and Tzedei Eliyahu filed a petition to the High Court against the Anti-Profiteering Tribunal in Haifa, claiming that these courts had no legal authority because they were established not under Israel government legislation, but by an earlier ordinance and relied on the mandatory laws. Moshe Zamora, president of the Supreme Court, rejected the claim and held that these courts and their decisions have legal validity. It was an important discussion, stating that mandatory laws are valid, and thus the Israeli law enjoyed the Second World War experience of British legislation and judges. To sum up, first, the black market was an extensive phenomenon that did not focus on a specific group in the population, and all levels of society handled it either as sellers or as buyers. Since the beginning of the economic supervision steps in August 1939, and throughout the entire periods until the late 50s. The black market included a vast variety of products, starting with eggs, milk, and meat, and ending with building raw materials or luxury items such as golden watches. The black market phenomenon existed even during the British modern and during the Independence War, periods that so far were hardly investigated within that context. Secondly, the study of the black market supports the claim that in Israel a culture of illegalism has developed. But it can be said that the Israeli public accept the law in condition and not automatically. Obedience to the law determined by the degree of benefit derived from it and the guiding logic behind it. When the subject was tested individually rather than seeing obedience to all the laws as a central value. This created a public distinction between essential rules, for example, those who clearly designed to secure the life, and the others which perceived as nonsense or nuisance that the state imposed on its citizens, which had no moral or utilitarian prevention to ignore them. For them, the moral values behind the laws against the black market were only a facade of the government presence. The scope of the black market and its centrality testify that the culture of not being a sucker or fire as collective mentality of the Israeli public existed already during the Yishuv period, a mandatory time, at least since the end of the 30s, and perhaps its roots stem from the Jewish existence in the diaspora. Throughout delving into the culture of not being a sucker revealed that the phenomenon is intricate and is not just a simple egotism. In fact, its sources are found within the egalitarian perception for the one who is not a sucker, is not motivated by the wish to get more from the whole and exploit the other individuals, but on the contrary, make sure not to get screwed and be like all the others. That is why its roots are embedded strongly in the Israeli culture, for one of its characteristics is its being most egalitarian culture. When purchase in the black market was done by few, it was enough to hurt many. But when it turned into a mass phenomenon, it was meant to prevent damage to the consumer who did not get products that others did manage to obtain. And last, the observation of the government steps against the black market clarifies the continuity between the various rule periods. The establishment of the state, which is described in Israeli history as a keystone, as a turning point from which the local history started, and surely the orders of the government and the rule, was not found to be such in this study. The characteristic of the black market, the commerce patterns, the action of the rule, the reaction of the public, all remained after the foundation of the state and during the independence war, just as they were found already during the British mandate. Thus, there is room to observe anew the common validation regarding the year 48 as a turning point also in other fields. Thank you very much.